instruction, and the formal definition is the amount of work represented in intended learning outcomes.
Perfect. So yeah, so per federal law, a unit or credit hour represents 50 minutes or 1 hour of classroom or direct faculty instruction and a minimum of 2 hours of out-of-class student work for each week. So for 15 weeks of instruction, so the semester length. So this also includes laboratory work, internships, those kind of things. So if a student is in a 3-credit unit lecture course, that equals 3 hours of lecture every week for that class, right? And then it would be 6 hours of out-of-class student work per week, because the federal law says 2 hours of out-of-class student work each week for the 15 weeks. That being said, SDSU recommends 3 hours of studying for each unit that you're enrolled in, not just 2. So studying, as many of you know, isn't just reading out of a textbook. So studying includes notes, reading, group meetings, research, going to office hours. So how we break it down here, we'll come back to that. Okay, so to break it down, and every NSO day, during the degree requirements presentation, well, probably about 20 minutes into the presentation at the time that I start to explain this. And it really, it works effectively because it gets people's attention because it scares them. So for a 3-unit class, it represents about 3 hours of instruction per week. So if a student is in 15 units, which is what we recommend per term in order to graduate in a timely manner, that would equal 15 hours of instruction per week. So for each unit, SDSU recommends 3 hours of study time per week per unit. So if you take the 15 units times the 3 hours of study time, so 15 units times 3 hours of study time, so that's 45 hours we are expecting a student to study. So if you take that 45 hours and you add it to 15 hours of instruction, we are expecting 60 hours of schoolwork per week. Intense, right? The reason we do this, the reason that we stress this and we talk about this isn't actually to scare students, but it's really to, a lot of these students, freshmen, are coming from a very different, most of you will remember high school, right? It's set up pretty differently than college. Would you agree?
Yes.
Just classes, how you learn, how you process information, how you take tests, how you do your homework. It's different. Same with transfer students. Transfer students coming from community college, even other universities are going to be different. And the structure and the coursework load is going to be really different compared to a community college. So you have 2 sets of students that are coming in, and the reason we stress the importance of this is they might think it's not a big deal. I've talked to many transfer students after, not many, but too many, after their very first semester who are already on academic probation. It's because they came to us from community college, working 40 hours a week, going to school full-time, maintaining a family, and everything was fine. And they didn't believe me in the degree requirements presentation. And I've actually had students say that, I didn't think you were serious. And they said, wow, you were serious, you weren't kidding. It's just a different level of studying and workload. So we do this not to scare students, but just to really start to bring the importance of what the expectations are in order to be a successful student. Now, having said that, this might not be the reality every single semester for every single student, right? I mean, do you all spend 60 hours per week? Yeah, probably not, right? But we want to be careful, because we don't want to set them up for failure, right? We want to set them up for success. So that's why we talk about this. Does anyone have any questions about that? Good? Okay. Yes?
I just want to reiterate that yeah, it's a little daunting and students will be, anxious about it and they might ask you like, that's not real, right? And be honest about it, this is really what, think about this from the explanation that she gave about, transitioning and all that stuff. So just be mindful of that. Just wanted to.
Thank you very much. And yeah, so I gave an example of transfer student, but think about a freshman. So think about coming from high school. Maybe you can remember your first day at orientation. So like when we are standing in arts and letters, oftentimes that is the largest setting a first-time freshman has ever been in for a lecture. It's that's their first introduction to how a lecture is going to be set up, right? Where you've got, 500 seats in arts and letters? It's a little crazy. And it's easy to get lost. It's easy to sort of blend in. I can't see everything that's happening. I imagine a professor can't see everything that's happening. So it's easy to start thinking, okay, maybe attendance isn't that big of a deal because I don't know if I'm really there or not. So that transition that a student is going to make from high school to college is really gonna, it can be daunting, like you used to say. So, yeah, I'll stop there. Any questions on that? Okay, perfect. So let's move on to some of the other definitions. All right, so lower division courses, oh, great, thank you. Excellent. And lower division courses, the ones numbered 100 through 299, are typically taken during the freshman and sophomore years, so the first and second year. Upper division courses? Yes.
Just below that on page 114, those numbered 300 through 499 are in the upper division.
So it's actually 300 through 599. So 300 through 599 are taken at the junior and senior years. Now, courses that are numbered 500 through 599 are both upper division and they're acceptable for advanced degrees. But so when we ask what are upper division, what the answer I'm looking for is 300 through 599. Any questions on that? Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure that I'm framing it so correctly. So if you're a sophomore, you finished the prerequisite for a 300 level class. Will the fact that you're a sophomore allow you to be dropped from that class, or like what's more important, the fact that you complete the prerequisite or your class level standard?
It all depends.
Okay.
So there's different scenarios in which students, a freshman or a sophomore, should not be taking the 300 level course. So it's just the general rule of thumb is that freshmen and sophomores are taking 100 through 299, and then juniors and seniors are taking 300 through 599. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any more questions on that? Yes.
I just think it's important for us to remember the fact that freshmen do not sign up for 300, and they will if you don't catch them. Just remember that. Just
Oh, yes.
reiterate that when you're doing your small group, that it's 300, only to 299.
Thank you very much. So you were asking more from a sophomore level, so that's why I was trying to frame the answer, but thank you very much for that. So when you're working with students at orientation, keep in mind, when you're working with freshmen, keep in mind they are first-time freshmen. They should not be signing up for 300 level or higher courses for multiple reasons. So yeah, we'll have to watch them. And that's particularly too when we get to our international orientation part, just because those students are coming from different school structures altogether. Sometimes they're coming from systems that don't even have numbering systems like we do. So yeah, it's just important to remember that freshmen, during freshman orientation, should not be signing up for 300 level or higher courses. Is that good? Okay. All right. So let's move on to student classification. So this refers to how students are classified into being freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. So classification is based on units. It is not based by year in school. So this information, was everyone able to find it on page 488? Okay. So it breaks it down. So a freshman is a student that has earned a total of fewer than 30 semester hours. So 0 to 29. A sophomore is a student that has earned 30 to 59 semester units. A junior has earned 60 to 89 semester units, and a senior has earned 90 units or more. Does that make sense? So classification is based on units, not by year in school. All right, full-time status. Does anyone want to review the definition of that? Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So like if the students come in with AP credit and they're like, oh, I have like 20 units, and then they sign up for like, are they able to sign up for like 300 level classes if it like adds up to more than 30?
No, because what would 30 units be? Sophomore, and sophomores still shouldn't be taking 300 level courses, yeah. That's a great question. And also keep in mind, I want to be careful that I don't get too confusing here. When the student comes in, when the student starts their first semester, and let's say they came in with 35 units, they are not actually considered a sophomore for that first semester. They are considered a first-time freshman, even if they have the units that put them at sophomore level. Once their first term ends, then their classification ends because they're no longer a first-time freshman. Does that make sense? I don't want to confuse too many people, but I just want to throw that out there because we might run into that. Because some of our classes say needs to have 30 units, but it's not just going off of units, it's actually going off of what's your classification. Does that make sense? Does it totally just contradict everything I just said? All right, anyone confused? Yes.
Does that transition happen just after the fall semester or after that whole first year? So by
After
the
the
spring
fall semester.
semester, then it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're not going to see too many. I mean, we have definitely an increased amount of students that have AP coursework, but it's a little rarer to see that many units. Any other questions on that to clarify? These are all great questions, by the way. Good? Okay. So let's go on to prerequisite. So who wants to tell me what a prerequisite is? Anybody? Ryan?
Not the official definition, but basically a class you have to take before you can take another class.
Okay. Well, I mean, the definition is what you have to complete before being able to take a course. So I was pretty close. So students must satisfy course prerequisites or their equivalent prior to taking the course. So if a course has a prerequisite, you have to satisfy that prerequisite before you can take that course. So when we're talking about prerequisites, and it's important to remember, some of our classes are what we call computer-enforced prerequisites. That means the computer is looking to see if you have the prerequisite, and if you don't, it won't even let you sign up for the class. But it actually, a surprisingly small number of our classes are computer enforced, and that's because we simply don't have the programming ability to program every single class that has a prerequisite. So a lot of our courses are not program enforced, which means it will allow the student into the course. Now the instructor can drop the student from the course, but the students can't rely on that, because it's not the instructor's responsibility to drop students from a course. So the student is the one responsible for their schedule, ultimately. So most often than not, the instructor doesn't drop the students. They have to drop themselves. So if, let's say, today, a student says, oh, I didn't realize I was in that class, and they just don't attend, and they were never dropped, they're in the class, what are they going to get? A WU, yeah, the equivalent of an F, because they stopped attending a course they were responsible for. So it's really, really imperative to stress the importance of students. They don't have to look in the catalog for prerequisites. That's one way to look up prerequisites. What's another way? In the class schedule. If you, I think I heard someone say class schedule. If you click on it. Yeah, on web portal in the class schedule, if you actually click on the class, it'll tell you if there's a prerequisite. So it's really important for students to understand that. And then faculty also have the authority to evaluate what's considered equivalent. So they have the authority to enforce the course prerequisite, and they also have the authority to evaluate what's considered an equivalent to that prerequisite. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions on that? Yes?
If a course has a prerequisite and a student doesn't take that prerequisite and is just in the higher course, but succeeds in it, it still counts for credit
If they weren't dropped.
if they weren't dropped.
Now, let's go back to why prerequisites exist to begin with. Because that scenario is less likely to happen. The more likely scenario to happen is if a student is somehow able to remain in the class and they actually attend the class and take the class. 9 times out of 10, the student is not successful in that class. And the reason is because the people that designed the course, that teach the course, that made the course, are the ones that are telling us. If a student comes to me to take Math 150 and they do not have pre-calculus, they will not be successful. Because I'm over here talking about this and they are back here. They're not understanding what I'm talking about. And that's why the whole prerequisites. So like a Chemistry 200, for example, if you don't have that background of the prerequisite, you're likely not going to be successful. So that's a great question, but yeah, we have to definitely think about that. That if they are somehow able to stay in the course, we want to set them up for success. And allowing a student to take the course without the prerequisite is not doing that. Awesome, thank you. Yes.
So just following on that, so like if I were to take like a language, like I speak Tagalog, so I took Filipino 200 just to complete like a GE Humanities, but if I wanted to like major or minor in Filipino, would I have had to have taken Filipino 100?
No, you usually don't go backwards.
Okay.
So if you looked at Filipino 200 or is it 200 or 201?
201.
201.
But it said the prerequisite was 100 and the professor wanted to, because I didn't need it to fulfill a language requirement, I just needed it to fulfill a GE like humanities requirement.
Usually part of that prerequisite is also going to be or a certain amount of years in high school. So for example, the prerequisite for Spanish 201 is Spanish 102 or 3 years of the high school Spanish. So there might be different ways to fulfill a prerequisite, not just a certain course, maybe years in high school or something like that. Going back to my Chemistry 200, there's 2 ways to fulfill that prerequisite, either by taking Chemistry 100 or, and that's how you're demonstrating the proficiency, or by taking it at high school and then taking the chemistry placement exam and placing into it. So sometimes there's multiple different ways to meet the prerequisite. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. Okay. So, kind of an example of that. So let's say you want to take a course that requires Biology 100 as a prerequisite. So biology is a general biology course. If you've never taken Biology 100, but let's say you took a similar course that allowed you to attain comparable knowledge about biology, a professor has the right to say, I will accept that as a prerequisite. That's their decision. They don't have to do that either, but they have the right to do that. And then faculty may require proof that the prerequisite has been completed, so they might need to see a transcript or a degree evaluation. And again, if you don't meet the prereq, you may be dropped from the course by the instructor. So always important to remember to check prerequisites and then check your schedule during the schedule adjustment period. So this is really important to reiterate to students. You know, when we see them in the summer, it's not as big of a deal, but when school starts, it's easy to forget that add-drop deadline, especially when you're a first-time freshman or even a transfer student used to other sort of more flexible deadlines. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, so advanced placement. So this can be found on pages 484 and then 485. So these are exams of the College Board Advanced Placement Program. So what happens when a student is in high school, they can take an AP class, and then they can take an AP exam. Sometimes you can take the exam without ever having taken the class. The exam is what gives you college credit, not taking the class. So just because you took an AP course, if you didn't take the class, if you didn't take the exam, you won't get college credit. So we may award college credit depending on the student's score on those exams that they took. The exams are not automatically sent to SDSU. The student has to request their official score report be sent to us. So it's not sent to us on the transcript from the high school, it's actually sent to us by College Board. And they have to request that sent to us. This will come up, and definitely this will come up. So it's just really important to remember that the student has to request AP scores sent to us. It doesn't happen automatically. And if you look on, oh, I have the wrong page. Can somebody tell me what page the AP table is on? 485, awesome, thank you. So if you look on page 45 towards the bottom of the table, if you look at Spanish language score of 3, it's the third one up from bottom left. So this score sheet shows you, based on the exam they took, what they're going to get. So if a student took the AP Spanish exam and scored a 3, how many units would they get? 6. Does it have an SDSU course equivalency?
Yes.
What is that? Spanish 201 and 211. And then is there any additional information? Perfect. Perfect. So that breaks it down for each one, each exam that we accept and we award credit for. So another example, if you look at, if a student receives a score of 3 on the AP US History exam, so if you look at that, how many units will they get? 6. And what courses will they earn credit in?
109 and 110.
Okay. And under additional information,
It's so
so it's important to remember that advanced placement is a national exam. So History 110, actually, so there's 3 parts of American institutions. We'll go through this more next week or the week after. But American institutions is made up of American history, United States Constitution, and California state and local government. History 110 is a class that fulfills, if taken here, is a class that fulfills California state and local government. However, advanced placement is a national exam. That's a state requirement. So a national exam gives you credit in History 110, but we're not going to clear the California state and local government. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we'll go over that in more detail when we cover American institutions. Okay. Yes.
Is there anywhere in the catalog that talks about credit from like other universities? Like when freshman students have taken like college work in the high school and they're asking about the equivalency, or is that just like you have to have the transcript be sent and then see if the school accepts it?
They would have to send us the transcript because sometimes it depends on which college they attend. Sometimes we don't always award credit. Most of the time we do. But yeah, they would just send the transcript to us just like you would if a transfer student had attended. And then we'll see what we can give them credit for. Okay, any other questions on that? All right, International Baccalaureate. So this is similar to AP. So International Baccalaureate, we also refer to this as IB. So Advanced Placement we refer to as AP, International Baccalaureate we refer to as IB. So IB is an accelerated course program during high school. And SDSU may award credit for scores 4 through 7 or sometimes 5 through 7 on higher level subject exams in the IBAC program. Bless you. So it's really important, 4 through 7, sometimes 5 through 7 on higher level. So we don't award credit for anything other than higher level. Okay, any questions on that?
I just want to say, it's not really a question, it's just a comment, because I was an IB student, and when I came in on my transcripts, it did say that my history was satisfied, but it's because, like, the catalog year previously, like, if I would have got a 4, it would have passed it, but since I got a 4 for that catalog year, it had upgraded to 5, so I didn't really get that credit, but on my degree evaluation, it did say that. So, like, I had to catch it myself and take it to advising, and then it was all cleared from there. But that was just, like, a personal experience. Like, nobody knew what to do. So, like, sometimes you have to catch it. So, yeah.
Okay. So that's a good example when you're in orientation, because it's going to be difficult sometimes to not necessarily apply your own experiences to it, but still be able to help the student. So that would be a good example. If you see something that's just not making sense from what you've learned and not making sense during what you learned during the training, then that would be a great time where you would stop and come grab either me or one of my colleagues to come over and kind of take a look at that. Okay. Okay, and so really important, as with AP scores, IB scores do not get sent to SDSU automatically, so students have to request an official score to be sent to us, just like AP. So if you look at that table for IB, which is on page 487, so if you looked at the IB geography exam, if the student earned a score of 5, you'll see that they'll only earn credit if she took the higher level IB exam. She would earn 6 units of credit. And she'll earn Geography 101 and 102. And she has to send those scores to us, right? In that example? Okay. Any questions on that? Yes?
By the time we're at orientation, would the students have already had to send their transcripts for AP credit, or like could they still do that?
They can still do that. It becomes a timing issue because of enforced registration courses, and we're going to get to that in another session. So we'll talk about that and what that means. And so basically there's going to be situations where if they haven't sent their AP or IB scores, just because they have them doesn't mean we're going to accept them. So we need to receive them and then evaluate them to see if we're going to award credit. So I mean, if you're working with a student, they say, hey, I took AP, this exam, I got this score, you can show them what they're going to get, but it's not official till we receive that score sheet and evaluate them. And in some examples, like when it comes to enforced registration, it's going to be a timing issue. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we start talking about enforced registration courses. So anytime a student is submitting scores or transcripts, they must be sent from the institution to SDSU. So a hand-delivered copy cannot be accepted. Okay. Okay. So, all right, let's just cover catalog year real quick. So I kind of messed up, and I won't do this going forward, because I had to sort of change the session last minute to allow for some more time for next session. So do you mind if we power through, and we'll probably get done a little earlier than 5 rather than take a break? Is that going to be okay? Okay. All right, so catalog year. So catalog year refers to the specific catalog year in which you have rights to. So you have rights to the catalog year of which you entered the institution, okay? So if you started this fall, you have catalog rights to the 2018-19 catalog. Now if you make any changes in a future catalog year, like let's say you add a major or you add a minor, that catalog, that change would be subject to that catalog year. Does that make sense? So if I started this fall, I'm under the 18-19 catalog for both my GE and my major. But if next year I add a minor, that minor would be under the 19-20 catalog. So I would refer to that catalog for anything to do with the minor. And I'd refer to the 18-19 catalog for anything to do with with those rights, the major and the GE, yes.
Is that a kind of like switching your major too, or just?
Yes, it does. We don't use that as an example, switching majors, only because we really want to focus on students remaining in their major. So we don't want to talk to, and we'll talk about this later, because students can't change their major in their first term and have it take effect before the add drop deadline. So we don't want to sort of be planting those seeds right away, so we use the example of minor instead. But yes, it would be the same. If you came in 17, 18 last fall, and this fall you change your major from business to psychology, for psychology, for the major, you now have rights to the 18, 19 catalog. You would keep the 17, 18 for your GE. Yes?
So I know this is like really extra, but if you like, let's say I added a Spanish minor this year, so I'm in the 18 to 19 catalog, and then next year, a requirement changed for the Spanish minor, and I like that better. Could I like drop the minor and then re-add it, and so that it would count for like the 1920 catalog year?
Jesus Christ.
You could. I will tell you, very rarely do we deduct things, we typically add things.
Okay.
Yeah. Usually we don't take away, but we like to add stuff sometimes. Yes?
So what happens if a student, like for example, is a business student, but they just changed, like for example, they're marketing, but they want to change to accounting? Do they still change the catalog years?
That's an emphasis. So that's different than changing your major.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Okay.
There's some situations where even if you stay in the same college, it's considered a major change. So for example, if you go from mechanical engineering to civil engineering, that's actually a major change.
Okay.
But in other examples, if you're in the College of Business, for example, if you change from management to marketing, that's an emphasis change.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a little different. Yes?
So as long as you change your major officially in the university, will your degree evaluation just automatically update?
Yeah, once you change your major officially, you'll submit a declaration form to the Office of the Registrar, and once it's updated, then when you pull up your degree evaluation, that's where you're going to see the updated major
So
year.
would you say the degree evaluation is more reliable than looking at a catalog year?
I wouldn't say it's more reliable. A degree evaluation is personalized to the student, so sometimes it's a little easier to understand the information, just because it's personalized, but it's not necessarily more reliable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions on that? Okay. All right, so again, like I stressed earlier, it's important to know the catalog year because it determines which graduation requirements the student is following. Okay, so schedule adjustment policy. So all adjustments to a student schedule must be completed by the 10th day of the term by 11:59 p.m. So that's one date to remember for each semester. All changes must be made by then. So for example, for this semester, the deadline was yesterday at 11:59 p.m. Is it a firm deadline? Yes. No exceptions can be made to this deadline. So this is going to be stressed more by Rayanne, our registrar, to our new students, but students will ask you about this probably. And it is a strict deadline. We do not allow students to make changes to their schedule after this deadline has passed. She'll talk a little bit more about that. I mean, we're not completely heartless. We do understand that some things happen, but they're considered seriously impelling. They're considered out of the student's control, and I'll let Rayanne kind of cover that piece of it when we get to that. But so, for all intents and purposes, when we're talking with students, we just simply want to say this is a hard and fast deadline. Okay, any questions on that? Yes?
So what happens after the drop deadline and on their report it still says that they're waitlisted? Does that ever happen?
They would either be in the class or they're not. Yeah. If they're in the class and they're responsible for that class, if they were on the wait list after the add drop deadline, they're no longer on the wait. The wait list no longer exists. Does that make sense? Any other questions on that? Okay. Okay. So if we flip to page 92, So I'm stealing a couple of things from next week, and that is because next week we're gonna spend quite a bit of time on the first graduation requirement, which is freshman competency requirements in math and writing. It's a little bit challenging to understand that concept, so I wanted to give plenty of time. So I'm stealing a couple of lighter concepts, and I'm gonna go over them right now. I'm not gonna put them on next week's quiz. You may see them on the week's after quiz, okay? So we'll recap next week if needed. So on page 92 is requirement number 7, and that is the resident requirement. So this refers to unit requirements that every student has to complete with courses taken here at SDSU, so in residence. So in other words, these rules are set up because we don't want a student thinking they can transfer in from UCSD with 110 units, take 10 units at SDSU and graduate with a bachelor's degree. Right, so there's certain units that have to be taken here in residence, and those are listed there. So, just as an example. So, for example, if you look under requirement number 7 and you look at item D, that particular rule is referring to at least 9 units in the upper division GE courses shall be taken within the CSU system. So that's just one example of the residence requirements. Any questions on that? Okay. If we move to page 92 through 93, this is number 8. This is the grade point average requirement. We refer to these as GPAs. So there are 4 different grade point averages, and each must be a minimum of 2.0, which is a C average, in order to graduate. So the first GPA is the SDSU GPA, and this is the average based on all courses taken at SDSU. The cumulative GPA is an average based on all courses at SDSU and other universities, colleges, community colleges. So this is all courses at SDSU and all transferable courses from other colleges. You have the major GPA, which is based on all upper division courses taken for the major. And if the student has a minor, they'll have a minor GPA as well. So to remain in good academic standing, the cumulative in the SDSU GPA must be a 2.0 or higher. If the GPAs fall below a 2.0, then the student is placed on academic probation. So while you need 2.0 GPAs to stay in good academic standing and to graduate, you definitely want to encourage students to do as best as possible, and this is because, and we'll talk more about this in future sessions, but this is because of impaction criteria. Because all majors at SDSU are impacted, and many of them require a higher GPA to get into the major, so they need to do better than just that 2.0. And again, we'll discuss in a few weeks exactly what impaction is and what that means. And then does anyone know where you can find your GPAs? Web portal, well, where specifically in web portal? Degree evaluation. Yeah, the very bottom of the degree evaluation. And there's also your unofficial transcript. You can see it in your unofficial transcript. And we'll be talking about degree evals a little bit further. Okay, so, oops. Okay, so next week, like I said, if we need a recap on the residence requirements or the GPA requirements, we'll recap if needed. And then next week, we'll be covering unit requirements, and we'll be covering freshman competency requirements in math and writing. We'll also have our first quiz, which will be on all the information except for the residence and GPA requirements. And I'm going to turn it over to NSPC, so don't pack up quite yet.
Real quick, I want to point out that just by being here today, you already know some of your script for your catalog. These are some of the terms that you actually describe, talk about in your small group. You might even get questions about it, so you're kind of ahead of the game. So keep that in mind as you're studying for your quiz and look at your script. Keep that in mind. Don't forget that you have to practice that, because it's going to come before you know it. So I just wanted to make sure that you made that connection, for this week and for future weeks. So other than that, thank you, Heather. And you guys have awesome questions, so keep that up. all be in good shape. So that's all I had to say.
Kyle has something else.
Okay.
You might want to keep your catalogs out because you're going to meet up with your TI and they're going to check it, just make sure that's all good to go. And then there is a review session next week, Monday, 4:30 to 5:30 with Roslyn in the student lounge in the student lounge.
This lounge.
Good, and then Brittany's group, you're meeting with me, okay?
Yeah. Hey, Heather.